A powerful opening that teases the reveal. She thought her son would never speak. Then she walked in on something that changed everything. Victoria Hale had everything money could buy. A sprawling estate nestled in the hills of Napa Valley, a luxury fashion brand that bore her name, and a lifestyle that graced the covers of high-end magazines. Yet behind the polished glass walls of her modern mansion, silence lingered like an unwelcome guest. Her 7-year-old son, Liam, was the reason her heart beat, and the reason it broke every day. Diagnosed with nonverbal autism at the age of 3, Liam had never spoken a word. Not mama, not yes, not even a sound to signal joy or sorrow. His world was quiet, closed off behind eyes that rarely met hers. And no matter how fiercely Victoria loved him, she couldn't find the bridge to reach him. She had tried everything. Top-tier behavioral therapists, cutting-edge sensory programs, private tutors, equine therapy, even international specialists flown in from Europe. The rooms of her home were filled with flashcards, weighted blankets, speech devices, tools that promised progress but delivered only frustration. Every evening, Victoria would sit beside Liam as he lined up his wooden blocks in perfect rows. She'd watch, waiting for a flicker of connection, a sign that her presence mattered. But Liam's gaze stayed fixed on the patterns he built, unaware, or perhaps unable, to show her that he knew she was there. The mansion, though filled with light and luxury, felt hollow. The echo of Liam's silence grew louder each day. People whispered that she was doing her best, that some children just don't come around. But Victoria refused to give up. She couldn't. Somewhere inside her little boy was a mind waiting to be unlocked. She believed that with everything she had. Still, belief didn't fill the silence. And no one, not even Victoria, could have guessed that the key to reaching Liam wouldn't come from a therapist, a doctor, or a device. It would come from the woman dusting the shelves. Rosa Alvarez arrived without fanfare, just a referral letter from a local agency and a warm, almost apologetic smile. She didn't say much during the interview. Her voice was soft, her English gentle but accented. Victoria had barely skimmed her resume. All she needed was someone dependable to help around the house. Someone quiet, someone discreet. Rosa was both. She moved through the mansion like a shadow, sweeping floors, folding laundry, and polishing surfaces with almost reverent care. She never complained, never asked for anything beyond her modest paycheck, and never intruded on Victoria's space. But it was how she moved around Liam that first caught Victoria's attention. Unlike others, Rosa never tried to force eye contact or speak loudly to get his attention. She didn't flinch when Liam flapped his hands or hummed while pacing in circles. In fact, she often mirrored his rhythm quietly, humming along, sweeping in sync with his steps. Sometimes Victoria would catch Rosa sitting on the floor nearby, not to engage Liam, but simply to be present in his orbit, reading aloud from old children's books in Spanish, softly, like a lullaby. Victoria noticed the subtle shift in Liam's energy. He seemed less agitated when Rosa was around. He even allowed her to sit closer over time, closer than any therapist had ever managed. Still, Victoria remained skeptical. She appreciated Rosa's presence, sure, but she chalked Liam's calmer behavior up to coincidence, or perhaps routine. She didn't ask questions. And Rosa never offered answers. There was something about her, though. A quiet weight behind her eyes, like someone who had lived an entire life before arriving here. A story left untold. But Victoria didn't pry. She was too exhausted for mysteries. If only she had looked a little closer. If only she had asked about the stack of worn language books Rosa kept in her small room downstairs. Or the way she always paused outside Liam's door, whispering phrases in languages Victoria couldn't recognize. Because what Victoria didn't know, what no one knew, was that Rosa Alvarez wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a teacher in disguise. And Liam was already learning. It was a Thursday afternoon. Victoria had left a board meeting early, her mind restless. She told her driver to skip the usual route and head straight home. No notice. No reason. Just a gut feeling. As she stepped inside the quiet mansion, something unusual stopped her in her tracks. Sound. Not just sound, voices. Laughter. Gentle phrases spoken rhythmically, like a dance. It was coming from the east wing, the playroom. Victoria set down her purse and walked slowly, heels silent on the marble floor. As she got closer, she could make out words. Not in English, French. Très bien, Liam. Encore une fois, Rosa's voice floated through the half-open door, calm and coaxing. And then came the response. A small voice. Hesitant, but real. J.E. Ver. Joer. Victoria froze. It was Liam. She pushed the door open just enough to peek through. There he was, her son, sitting cross-legged on the rug, facing Rosa. He was holding flashcards in his lap. Rosa, kneeling across from him, held up a toy and asked in Spanish, ¿Qué color es este? Liam answered, Rojo. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Then came Mandarin. Rosa pointed to a picture of a bird. Je cherche mi. Liam, Ijiniao. Tears blurred Victoria's vision. She fumbled for her phone and hit record, unable to believe what she was witnessing. Her son, her nonverbal, unreachable child, was responding. Not once. Not by accident. But again and again, in different languages, with understanding and intent. It was like watching a locked door swing open for the first time. She stood there, stunned, for several minutes. She didn't want to interrupt the moment. Didn't want to break the spell. Eventually, Rosa glanced toward the door and saw her. She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled gently and placed a hand over her heart. I was going to tell you, Rosa said quietly. But I didn't want to promise anything until he was ready. Victoria couldn't speak. She walked over to Liam, dropped to her knees, and touched his cheek. He looked into her eyes. Really looked. And in the softest voice she'd ever heard, he whispered, Mama. Victoria didn't sleep that night. Even hours after the playroom discovery, she sat curled on the living room sofa, her phone in hand, rewatching the video over and over again. Liam's small voice echoed in her ears like a miracle. She couldn't decide if she wanted to cry again, or just hold her son forever. But something inside her needed answers. Not just about Liam's sudden transformation, but about Rosa. The next morning, over breakfast, Victoria invited Rosa to sit down, a rare request. Rosa hesitated but obeyed, gently wiping her hands on her apron before taking the seat across from her employer. You said you were going to tell me, Victoria began softly, but you didn't. Why? Rosa lowered her eyes. Because I've learned not to expect people to listen. Victoria said nothing, waiting. I was a linguistics professor in Bogota, Rosa finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. At the National University of Colombia. I specialized in early language acquisition and alternative communication models for children on the spectrum. Victoria blinked. You're a professor? Rosa nodded. Was. Until the violence got too close to my family. I left everything. Papers, titles, reputation. Came here with nothing but what I knew, and what I hoped I could still give. Her eyes softened as she looked toward the hallway where Liam had just wandered by, humming. I didn't take this job to clean, Mrs. Hale, she said. I took it because I saw your son's eyes. The way he watched patterns, repeated sounds. It reminded me of my students, the ones people gave up on until someone tried to speak their language. Victoria's throat tightened. But why the languages? Why not just teach him to talk? Rosa smiled. Because his brain doesn't work in straight lines. It searches for rhythm, for tone, for structure. Foreign languages, especially tonal ones, create pathways that standard speech therapy can't. I didn't push. I just offered the tools. Liam did the rest. Victoria looked at the woman across from her with new eyes. This wasn't a housekeeper. This was someone who had seen her son in a way no one else ever had. "You could have told me," Victoria whispered. "I didn't want a job," Rosa replied. "I wanted to help him, whether you ever noticed or not." And with that, the truth settled between them, not as a betrayal, but as a quiet, beautiful gift. Victoria stood in the hallway long after Rosa left the kitchen, her eyes fixed on Liam as he sat on the living room floor, calmly flipping through a Mandarin picture book. No blocks, no pacing, just quiet focus and presence. It was too much. She turned into her bedroom, closed the door, and finally let go. The tears came in waves, years of frustration, guilt, and exhaustion crashing all at once. She had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, flown across continents, hired top experts, and none of it had brought her closer to her son. Not the specialists, not the cutting-edge therapies, not the prestige clinics with waiting lists and five-star reviews. It had been Rosa, a woman quietly dusting her bookshelves, a stranger with no official credentials in this country. No charts, no promises, no invoices, just presence, just patience, just human connection. Later that day, Victoria asked Rosa to meet her in the study. She didn't dress up. No pretense, no control, just a mother, humbled. "I owe you more than I can ever say," Victoria began, her voice raw. "I spent so long trying to fix Liam. I never stopped to consider that what he needed wasn't fixing. He needed someone to speak his language." Rosa said nothing. She waited. Victoria stepped forward, tears in her eyes again. "Please don't go. I don't want you here as a housekeeper anymore. I want you here as Liam's language coach, as his teacher, his guide." Rosa's lips trembled. "You don't need to do that." "I do," Victoria cut in. "Not because you need it. Because he does. Because I do." For the first time, Rosa looked unsure. "But the world you live in, it's not mine." Victoria shook her head. "Then I'll make space. My world hasn't worked for Liam. Yours did. And I want you to have everything you need to keep helping him thrive." A long silence passed between them. Then Rosa nodded slowly. "I'll stay. For Liam." Victoria reached out and took Rosa's hand, a bond forming between them that went deeper than employer and employee. This was now a partnership rooted in purpose. Because from that moment on, Victoria Hale stopped trying to force Liam into the world as it was. Instead, with Rosa by her side, she began building a world where he could truly belong. The seasons shifted, but nothing transformed more beautifully than Liam. In the months that followed Rosa's official return as Liam's language coach, the mansion no longer echoed with sterile silence. It rang with voices, curious, musical, and alive. Liam didn't just repeat words anymore, he conversed. Not always perfectly, not always smoothly, but with intent, with emotion, with joy. Victoria often sat in awe as Liam responded to Rosa in Mandarin, asked questions in French, and even giggled through tongue twisters in Swahili. Rosa introduced language as music, stories, games, rhythm, and sound. She never forced. She invited. And Liam followed with astonishing grace. Victoria restructured her entire life. She stepped back from the company board, sold one of her properties, freed up every ounce of time that could be better spent with Liam. No more therapists analyzing him like a puzzle, just a team rooted in love and learning. She and Rosa became partners not just in Liam's education, but in his healing. Together, they traveled. To a quiet village in northern Spain where Liam asked for his favorite pastry in flawless Catalan. To Taiwan, where a Mandarin-speaking child took his hand and led him through a temple garden. To Kenya, where Swahili songs became lullabies under wide African skies. Everywhere they went, Liam surprised strangers with his grasp of their mother tongue. Locals were charmed. Tourists recorded videos. Teachers asked questions. And before long, the media noticed. It started with a viral clip, Liam reading a short fable in perfect French while Victoria and Rosa watched with teary eyes. The post caption read, "He was once nonverbal. Now he speaks 9 languages." That video exploded. TV interviews followed. Parenting magazines called. Autism awareness groups flooded Victoria's inbox with messages of admiration and gratitude. The world wanted to know who this boy was, and who the woman behind his breakthrough had been. Victoria never took credit. Every time a microphone was handed to her, she turned it toward Rosa. "She didn't just teach Liam to speak," she told one interviewer. "She taught me to listen." Liam's story didn't just inspire, it challenged everything people thought they knew about autism, communication, and human potential. One neurologist commented, "What this child demonstrates is that neurodivergent doesn't mean broken, it means wired differently. And sometimes, it takes a different language to unlock the genius within." And still, Rosa remained humble. She often declined interviews, saying quietly, "The story isn't about me. It's about Liam. I just spoke to him in a way he could understand." But everyone could see, what Rosa had unlocked wasn't just Liam's voice. It was a world of possibility. With the world now watching, Victoria knew she had the platform and the resources to do more. One evening, as they sipped tea on the back patio and watched Liam build word blocks in 3 different languages, Victoria turned to Rosa with a question she had been holding in her heart. "What would you do if money weren't a barrier? If the world actually listened?" Rosa hesitated, unsure. Victoria pressed gently, "Tell me your dream, Rosa." "Really?" After a long pause, Rosa finally spoke. "In Colombia, I once designed a curriculum, one that taught autistic children through language immersion. But no one believed in it. No one funded it. And then I had to leave everything behind." Victoria didn't blink. "Let's build it now. Together." And just like that, the Brooks Hale Foundation for Multilingual Autism Communication was born. Victoria funded the project entirely, setting aside millions to acquire property, hire staff, and translate Rosa's once-forgotten curriculum into a living, breathing program. They created in-person and online modules that introduced children to language through music, storytelling, and immersive play, tailored to neurodivergent minds. Within weeks, families lined up. From across the country came desperate parents, tired of being told their children were unreachable. Rosa greeted each one with warmth, never promising miracles, but offering something far more powerful: hope. And at the center of it all was Liam. Now 8 years old, more confident, still quirky, still gentle, but undeniably thriving, he became the unofficial ambassador of the movement. In every brochure, every news segment, every seminar, there was a photo of Liam, smiling, listening, speaking, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in Tagalog, always in his own time. His story proved what many had long suspected, that intelligence and potential often hide behind walls not of disability, but of misunderstanding. Parents began calling him the boy who cracked the code. And Rosa? She stood quietly behind the scenes, her eyes shining as children across the world began to speak their first words, not in English alone, but in a kaleidoscope of languages that opened doors no diagnosis ever could. The sun filtered softly through the windows of the Foundation's main classroom, now filled with laughter, color, and the buzz of possibility. On a small stage at the front, Liam stood beside Rosa, holding a handmade card behind his back. It was Mother's Day. The families gathered in quiet anticipation, their eyes already brimming. And then, with his usual careful composure and a hint of a smile, Liam stepped forward. He looked up at his mother. And then, clear as a bell, he spoke. "I love you, Mama." First in English, then in French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, Swahili, Russian, Tagalog, and finally, in Rosa's native tongue, Portuguese. 9 times. 9 voices. 1 truth. Victoria broke down in tears. 4 years, she had begged the universe for just 1 word from her son. And now he had given her 9. Not as a trick, not as a performance, but as a gift. An offering of everything he'd been holding inside, now finally free to take shape. Later that night, as she tucked him in and kissed his forehead, Liam whispered, "Mama, more tomorrow?" She smiled. "Always." In a soft voiceover, Victoria's narration carried the story to its close. "The world told me my son was broken, that he'd never speak, never connect, never live fully. But they were wrong. He wasn't broken. He was just waiting for the right voice. For someone who saw him not as a puzzle, but as a person. For someone who understood that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits in silence. And when it finally speaks, it speaks in every language." The screen faded to black with the words, "For every child waiting to be heard. For every mother still hoping. You are not alone." And in the corner, a single logo, the Brooks Hale Foundation. Because Liam's voice was just the beginning. And love, true love, speaks far beyond words.